On an early morning takeoff in Kentucky,
100 knots, checked.
two experienced pilots struggle to get their regional jet off the ground.
B1, rotate. Whoa.
And crash into a nearby field.
This was a catastrophic accident.
Investigators try to piece together what went wrong
Get those to Washington.
and end up with more questions than answers.
Why the heck would they stop there?
Only by retracing the taxi route
All the cues are right there, in plain sight.
and listening to the cockpit discussions
That is weird with no lights.
Yeah.
do investigators discover the grim truth.
They finally realize something's wrong, but it's already too late.
It's almost 6 in the morning in Lexington, Kentucky. The pilots of Comair Flight 5191 prepare for their pre-flight briefing. In command is Captain Jeff Clay, an experienced pilot with more than 4,700 flying hours.
Man, I always feel like I could eat a little more when I get a seatbelt like this.
First Officer James Polhinky is also a seasoned pilot with more than 6,500 hours.
You up for flying this leg?
Yeah, I'll take us to Atlanta.
Both the captain and the first officer were very highly regarded.
Right seat flex, take off.
They had an outstanding professional reputation, and individuals that had flown with them had nothing but high marks and very, very favorable comments as far as their qualities.
The crew is flying a Bombardier CRJ-100, a small twin-engine jet designed for short commuter flights. Sean Pruchnicki flew that aircraft for Comair for 10 years.
The CRJ is an aircraft that's built for short-haul flights. For example, the Lexington to Atlanta, less than an hour type flight is really what these airplanes are designed to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to take this time to welcome you on board Comair Flight 5191, direct to Atlanta. We'll try to keep it as quiet as possible. Hopefully you can catch a nap on the way there. It's our pleasure having you on board today.
There are 47 passengers and 1 flight attendant on today's flight. The pilots begin their briefing.
Right flex takeoff procedures off of, he said what runway? 24?
It's 2-2.
Something that we do prior to takeoff is we do a flight briefing between the two crew members. And the primary reason we do this is to make sure that everyone has the same amount of information and knowledge to safely depart the airport.
Huh. On 22, the ILS is out. Even the other night, the runway identifier lights were out all over the place.
All right.
22's your short taxi. Any questions?
No questions before starting your leisure.
In the cabin, passengers prepare for takeoff.
Seatbelt, please.
Today, they are bound for Atlanta, Georgia. Just a 67-minute flight straight south from Lexington's Bluegrass Airport.
Comair 191 is ready to taxi.
Comair 191, taxi to runway 22. Altimeter 3000. Winds are 200 at 8.
3000 and taxi 22, Comair 191.
Lexington's air traffic controller clears Flight 5191 to the runway and then turns his attention to another plane.
Eagle Flight runway 22, cleared for takeoff.
With few planes at this small airport in near-perfect weather, this flight is far from challenging for these seasoned pilots.
During the taxi out, the captain is responsible primarily for navigating the aircraft on the airport surface. first officer is running numerous checklists and verifying that the aircraft is safe for departure.
Folks, we're going to be underway momentarily, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. We're already in the cabin, sir.
Thank you.
Cabin reports received. Before takeoff checks complete. Ready.
All set.
At your leisure, Comair 121.
Ready to go.
Comair 191.
Lexington Tower. Fly runway heading. Clear for takeoff.
Runway heading cleared for takeoff, 191.
Anti-ice off, lights set, takeoff config's okay, lineup checks completed.
All yours, Jim.
Captain Clay hands control of the aircraft to First Officer Paul Hinkey for takeoff.
My brakes, my controls. Set thrust, please.
Thrust set.
That is weird with no lights.
Yeah. Under knots.
Checks.
Something's not right
V1. Rotate.
as 5191 prepares to lift off.
Whoa.
Damn it!
Comair Flight 5191 hurtles into a field less than half a mile from the runway.
This is Lexington. Alert 3. West side of the runway with a Comair regional jet taking off.
We knew something was wrong. We never get an Alert 3. We never get one.
Public Safety Officer Pete Moppin rushes to the scene.
It's hot. I mean, it's very hot. There were explosions. Can we save anybody? That was what I was thinking when I saw this ball of fire.
"49 people are dead after the tragic takeoff of Comair Flight 5191. First Officer Paul Hinkey is the only survivor.
The first responders' quick actions were the reason that First Officer Paul Hinkey survived this accident. He was so traumatically injured that they recognized that time was of the essence and transported him to the hospital rather than waiting for an ambulance.
And he thanked me for saving his life. I told him that was my job, but I was glad that I was there to do what I did, and I told him that.
The question NTSB investigators now need to answer is why Comair Flight 5191 couldn't get off the ground. As soon as the fires are put out and the crash site is safe, NTSB investigators begin looking for clues to discover why Comair Flight 5191 crashed less than half a mile from Lexington's Bluegrass Airport.
Make sure every scrap is documented. We need a clear picture of the path this plane took before impact.
Lead investigator Joe Sedor is among the first to arrive at the crash site.
In this case, it was quite interesting because initially we didn't have much. An airplane had crashed. We didn't know if it was on the airport, off the airport. We actually started at the final resting place for the wreckage, and then we walked back towards the airport.
First impact point is there. And the plane hit those trees over there. Those impact marks aren't more than 20 feet up those trunks.
We were looking at the trajectory of the airplane. Clearly looked like it took off just about the end of the runway and immediately started contacting trees into the wreckage site.
The wreckage path tells investigators that the plane was struggling to get off the ground. Was it engine trouble or something else?
It looks like they took off from runway 26. But hang on. 26 wasn't in use last night.
Lexington Airport has two runways, runway 26 and runway 22.
According to the flight plan, they were supposed to take off from runway 22. So how the heck did they end up over here?
Investigators are surprised to discover that Flight 5191 took off from the wrong runway.
Well, at that point in time, because we knew that it was a wrong runway takeoff, the question is why, right? And it's one that doesn't make sense.
Did they misunderstand their instructions or deliberately change their plans to take off from a different runway?
There's got to be something on that CVR about why they were on runway 26. Get those to Washington.
The flight recorder and the cockpit voice recorder were retrieved and flown back here to Washington, D.C.
But being on the wrong runway doesn't explain why the plane barely made it off the ground.
Let's take a closer look at those engines.
When the engines are examined, what the investigator is looking for is damage. The more damage that there is and the type of damage tells us that if it was turning at high speed or turning at a lower speed.
Hey, they were spinning all right.
Evidence of deformed blades suggests the engines were running on impact.
All the indications were that both engines were operating at high power when the breakup sequence started. There was no problem with the engines.
Something else must have kept them from getting airborne. Maybe they were too heavy?
With engine failure ruled out, the team wonders if the plane was loaded with too much weight to take off.
There's a certain maximum weight that the aircraft can take off safely with. So what we do is we calculate the load that's on the aircraft at the time of the accident.
Oh, here it is. CRJ's max takeoff weight is 50,178 pounds.
And the load manifested the plane weighed 49,087 pounds on that day. It's close, but it's within their limit.
The aircraft wasn't too heavy to take off.
In that aircraft on that day, with that weight, how much runway would be needed to take off safely?
Using the actual weight of the aircraft and the CRJ-100 specifications, investigators calculate how much runway the plane needed to lift off.
The weight of the aircraft affects how fast they have to be going to be able to lift off, and that is directly correlated to how much runway it takes to be able to achieve that speed.
3,744 feet.
3,744 feet, and runway 26 is
3,501 feet.
Investigators reach an astonishing conclusion.
runway 26 is 243 feet too short. They ran out of runway.
They now understand why the plane couldn't get airborne. But they're still mystified. Why didn't Flight 5191 take off from the longer runway?
Hate to say this, but you're not going to get any answers from the first officer either. His injuries are very severe.
The first officer is medically unfit to be interviewed. It's a big loss to the investigation.
It can be frustrating when you're not able to speak with people that you'd like to speak with, but as investigators, we need to work with the data that we have.
Investigators look for other clues that might reveal why Flight 5191 ended up on a runway they were not cleared to use.
All right, they left the gate here. They taxi along here. They're supposed to leave from runway 22 here. But they end up here. The question is, why?
So when we were looking into trying to understand why this flight crew thought they were on runway 22, we looked at anything that was different, anything that the flight crew may have misunderstood with regard to both the airport and the charts or any of their training.
Hey, look at this. Our guys got some shots of the runway. Hey, check this out. Taxiway to runway 22. It's blocked off by construction.
There were numerous construction projects that were in place at the Lexington Airport the day of the accident.
Okay, sure, but wasn't that in their chart?
Normally, when a taxiway is closed, pilots receive an interim airport chart with an alternate route.
Nope, nothing on the chart.
Investigators are amazed to learn that the crew's airport chart only showed the taxi route before construction, not the updated taxi route.
It is a surprise to see at the airport construction had not been updated in the charts that the flight crew had.
It's a disturbing find. Could out-of-date taxi charts have misled the pilots into taking off from a runway that was too short for their plane?
So they get out there and they find their taxiways blocked, and they don't have anything to tell them how to get to runway 22.
That could trip you up.
But something doesn't add up. Comair Flight 5191 wasn't the only plane departing Lexington that morning.
Other planes left before them, and none of them ended up on runway 26.
Eagle Flight runway 22. Cleared for takeoff.
The other two flights that took off prior to 5191. I received the same information that the flight crew from 5191 received and did not have any difficulties in navigating to the runway.
The fact that two other aircraft were able to depart successfully that morning caused us to look deeper.
Maybe there's something on the security footage.
Investigators turn their attention to CCTV footage in the hopes that it will explain why Comair 5191 took off from the wrong runway.
We were able to retrieve security footage from cameras on the parking garage that showed our aircraft taxiing out that morning.
All right, let's see what they were actually up to.
Investigators quickly confirm how straightforward the taxi route was.
Taxi's short and there's not another aircraft in sight.
Our assessment based on examination of surveillance video showed that it was a nominal taxi. The taxi route from the ramp to runway 22 was straightforward and only required one runway crossing 26.
Wait, stop it right there. It looks like they've stopped at the hold short line for runway 26.
Before takeoff, planes stop or hold short of the runway until they're cleared to proceed by air traffic control.
Well, they were on their way to runway 22. Why the heck would they stop there?
Investigators are startled by the discovery.
We noticed at that time that the aircraft had stopped prior to runway 26 for over 50 seconds. This is unusual because there was no real reason for them to stop there.
We need to see the taxi route.
All right.
Were there clues telling the pilots they were in the wrong place?
One of our main questions when we realized that they stopped for 50 seconds at the hold short line for runway 26 was, what could they have been seeing?
To better understand why the pilots of Comair Flight 5191 stopped at the hold short line for the wrong runway,
All right, let's get started.
investigators retrace their taxi route.
We wanted to understand what the flight crew was seeing. In order to do that, we had to do a taxi demonstration to identify all the signage, the markings, and the cues available to the flight crew.
There on the left, there's a sign for runway 26. Straight ahead, I can see the hold short line for runway 26. I mean, it's as clear as day.
Things that we were looking for during that taxi demo were things like the quality of the markings on the taxiway, the signage, whether it was illuminated or not.
The taxi line splits three ways.
Investigators can see what the pilots would have seen from the hold short line for runway 26. The line on the left goes to runway 26. The line in the middle is the route to runway 22. The line on the right is runway 22's old taxi route, blocked by barricades.
I can clearly see the sign is telling us that we're at the hold short line for runway 26. I mean, it's hard to miss that.
Investigators discover that the crew had clear cues that they were at the hold short line for runway 26, not 22. The question remains, how did they miss those cues?
Okay, let's go to 26.
The test plane follows the line on the left to runway 26.
Okay, see? That's where they should have taken the taxi route and stopped the hold short line for runway 22.
Investigators are surprised to learn that even as Flight 5191 was turning onto runway 26, the crew had a clear view of the sign pointing to the runway they were meant to be on.
There were no features in the environment in terms of the signs, marking, or lighting that showed they were on runway 22.
All the cues are right there, in plain sight.
Joe Sedor then uncovers one more disturbing fact.
When we taxied from the taxiway onto and turned onto runway 26, all of the lights on runway 26 were out, and there was no lights in the distance. As an experienced pilot, I look at that and say, why did this flight crew take off from this runway?
We need to know what was going on in that cockpit.
That is weird with no lights.
Yeah.
The cockpit voice recorder from Comair Flight 5191 is finally ready to be reviewed.
Okay, let's hear what we've got.
It may be the only hope of explaining why the crew ended up on an out-of-service runway, instead of the one they were cleared to use.
In this type of human factors accident, it's very difficult because we have to try to determine what the pilots were thinking. The main tool that we use in order to determine that is the cockpit voice recorder. The CVR was very important in understanding what the flight crew was talking about and what they were doing during the taxi and the takeoff.
Go for flying this leg? I'll take us to Atlanta.
Okay, so the first officer is going to fly. That's standard stuff.
The flight crew were conducting themselves in a professional manner.
For home briefing, Comair standard, run the checklist, your leisure. Keep me out of trouble, I'll do the same for you.
I'll do the same. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, here comes the taxi brief.
Flight seat flex takeoff procedures off
You said what runway, 24?
That's 22.
22. The ILS is out on 22. Came in the other night, the runway identifier lights were out all over the place.
All right. 22's a short taxi. Any questions? No questions before starting at your leisure.
Something in the briefing surprises investigators.
Wait, stop it right there. Is that not a short brief to you?
They discover that the crew used an abbreviated version of the taxi brief called Comair Standard.
Pull up the Comair standard taxi brief. There's no mention of crossing runways or stopping to call ATC if they're unsure where they are.
Investigators are baffled to discover that even the shortened taxi brief with 8 checklist items, including a very crucial one, wasn't followed.
Yeah, they never briefed on the runway they had to cross to get to runway 22.
The crew's abbreviated briefing that morning was a deviation from standard operating procedures that we identified.
Had the crew done a full taxi briefing, they would have discussed the need to cross runway 26 on the way to 22.
They missed an opportunity to review the airport diagram and determine that they needed to cross runway 26, an intervening runway, before they reached runway 22.
Okay, let's hear their taxi checklist.
Flight controls. Check left. On the right, trims.
Engage 07.2.
Radar terrain displays. All taxi checks complete.
Finish up the before takeoff checklist, your leisure.
One other thing on the CVR we heard was the captain using the term, at your leisure. It was used so many times on the CVR. What this told us is that this flight crew was relaxed. Maybe they were a little bit too relaxed.
Yeah, I know 3 guys at Kennedy.
Actually, 2 guys. One went, but he did get through the sims.
Oh, really?
Then a first officer from Cincinnati. He got through the second part, and that's as far as he got.
Wait, stop it right there.
Investigators cannot believe what they're hearing.
What the heck is he talking about?
Instead of focusing on their checklists, the crew of 5191 were having a casual conversation during a critical moment. It's a major breach of what's called the sterile cockpit rule.
The sterile cockpit rule requires that pilots refrain from non-operational conversation during significant portions of flight. One of the key reasons for the sterile cockpit rule is that non-pertinent conversation can be distracting.
And that's as far as he got.
And then he actually got offered the position.
Did he take it, or?
Yeah, he took it.
Oh, okay.
The captain should be shutting this conversation down, not encouraging it.
Although the first officer started the conversation, the captain is responsible for ensuring that sterile cockpit rule is enforced and distractions do not enter the cockpit that could affect the safety of flight.
After 40 seconds of casual conversation,
Second engine started. Anti-ice probes. Windshield low.
investigators hear the pilots turn to their takeoff checklist.
Now they finally get back to their jobs.
We were surprised by that. That non-pertinent conversation was in a critical area when the flight crew is making their taxi out to the runway, where the flight crew needs to be 100% flying the aircraft.
Could that period of inattention hold the key to this tragic accident?
Okay, let's see what we've got so far.
Investigators wonder if a casual conversation is at the heart of the crash of Comair Flight 5191.
We skipped out at a briefing that would have told them they needed to cross 26 to get to 22. Then for almost a minute, they violate the sterile cockpit rule. Let's see what happens when they get here.
Investigators hope the crew will give some indication why they stopped at the hold short line for runway 26.
Thrust reversers are armed. Autocross flow is manual.
Ignition is off. Altimeters are 3000, across the board, cross-checked. I'll check in with the cabin.
That's it?
It was surprising to us that there was no conversation about their location on the airfield or confusion about it while they were holding short on runway 26.
We know they were distracted, but when they stop their chit-chat, they don't seem to recognize, know, or check where they are.
We got no information based on the conversation of the flight crew while they were holding short that they were disoriented. No indications at all.
Investigators are amazed by what they hear next.
At your leisure, Comair 121, ready to go. Comair 191, Lexington Tower. Fly runway heading, clear for takeoff.
Hold there. So they're completely relaxed when they ask for clearance. In fact, so relaxed or distracted that the first officer uses the wrong flight number.
Investigators realize the grim truth.
These guys actually thought they were lined up for runway 22.
The fact that they stopped at runway 26 and subsequently called for takeoff indicates that they lost awareness that they had not crossed runway 26.
They turn onto runway 26. Then what? Keep going.
Lineup checks completed.
All yours, Jim.
First officer takes the controls. So he's looking ahead, probably for the first time.
At this time, the captain taxied the aircraft out onto the runway and then transferred controls to the first officer. So before this time, the first officer was heads down in the cockpit.
My brakes, my controls.
When the first officer looked out, he saw a runway. He may not have perceived that it was a narrower runway than runway 22.
They're looking down runway 26. Why don't they see the sign for 22 off to the right?
Neither pilot cross-checked their location at the time that they took the runway.
Set thrust, please.
Thrust set.
That is weird with no lights.
Yeah.
Hold on. Runway 26 is not in use, so it's not lit. They see the lights for 22 until they cross it. They're looking down a pitch dark runway, and it doesn't faze them.
Investigators wonder if the pilots were confused about what the runway should have looked like.
When they began the takeoff roll on runway 26, they had no centerline lights or edge lights on this runway. However, based on the first officer's previous experience the night before, he did not expect to see lights.
The ILS is out on 22. Came in the other night, the runway identifier lights were out all over the place.
And so it would not necessarily have been an unusual sight picture.
Such decision-making based on a person's mistaken assessment is called confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias is where the flight crew expects something to be there, even though it might not actually be there. He noticed there was no lights on the runway, but he just accepted the fact.
What happens next?
Under knots.
Checks.
The pilots now see they're almost out of runway
V1, rotate.
and don't have the required speed to get airborne.
Whoa.
Damn it!
That's it. They finally realize something's wrong and it's too late.
Based on our calculations, the crew needed to recognize that they were on the wrong runway and successfully reject the takeoff about 20 seconds into the takeoff roll. However, their recognition did not occur until much later when the captain called rotate at a lower speed than what was required.
Investigators have unraveled the mystery of what happened inside the cockpit of Flight 5191.
They started by skipping the full briefing. And then after a long discussion about the airline, they lose sight of where they are. They stop at the wrong place, and they completely miss all the signage that they're at the wrong runway. By the time they figure out the mistake, it's too late. These guys are going through the motions when they should have been at full attention.
The crew's failure to use available cues and aids to identify and check the plane's location led to the tragedy of Comair Flight 5191. But the team still has one unanswered question.
Why didn't the controller tell them they were at the wrong runway?
Investigators wonder if the air traffic controller of Comair Flight 5191 could have picked up the crew's error and prevented the accident.
Happy to answer any questions.
With the air traffic controller, we were trying to understand, did the controller have an opportunity to see this airplane take the wrong runway and prevent the accident?
At 6:05, they asked for takeoff clearance. Runway 22 was free, so I gave Comair clearance for takeoff.
At your leisure, Comair 121, ready to go.
Comair 191, Lexington Tower. Fly runway heading, clear for takeoff.
Runway heading clear for takeoff, 191.
And what did you do next?
I saw the plane proceed towards runway 26 and then scanned runway 22 to make sure there were no vehicles on it.
Did you watch the flight take off?
Not if I have other jobs to do.
Investigators make one final discovery.
And then I turned over here to count my flight strips.
And why would you start counting your flight strips then?
I wasn't busy. It only takes a few minutes. And there was no reason to think that they'd have any problems. In 17 years, I've never seen a plane that size try to take off from runway 26.
The controller was not watching the airplane and assumed that the airplane was going to take off on the correct runway because this is such a simple airport and because there was no other traffic on the airport at the time of the accident.
And if you hadn't turned away, would you have noticed that they were in the wrong place?
I might have.
FAA regulations do not require controllers to monitor every takeoff. But if the controller had been watching the runway instead of counting flight strips, he might have noticed Flight 5191's mistake.
He was not actually required, nor are any controllers required, to actually watch an aircraft during its takeoff roll. Had they been required to do that, this would have given an opportunity to have the takeoff aborted.
The NTSB concludes that several factors led the pilots to lose track of their position on their way to the runway.
Contributing to that was the flight crew's failure to maintain sterile cockpit and to have a non-pertinent conversation prior to takeoff.
This crash happened because of a period of distraction during what was perceived as a relatively simple taxi. And it illustrates the perils of distraction in that it can take you off task. It can cause you to lose awareness. And in this case, both crew members lost awareness of where they were on that airport surface and made a mistake that was extremely consequential.
Among the NTSB's recommendations is a basic technological change to prevent pilots from getting lost. The CRJ-100 at the time had sophisticated avionics, but it lacked a simple GPS system available in cars of the same era.
Install moving map GPS displays in CRJ-100 cockpits.
The NTSB also makes recommendations for flight crews.
Require pilots to check that they are at their assigned runway before crossing the hold short line.
First Officer James Polhinky, the lone survivor of Comair Flight 5191, suffered severe injuries, including the loss of his left leg. He never returned to commercial aviation.
This was a catastrophic accident. It affected scores and scores of lives. But the legacy of this accident are the safety changes that have been made to prevent this type of accident from happening in the future.
This accident shows that there are threats in any environment, no matter how docile they seem, and that flight crews have to be aware and have to be looking for all the threats at all the time.